Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Wednesday to you. I'm Carla Nelson, creator of BFW Foundation, and today I have an incredible person with me. I have Ashley in Cloud, attorney Ashley in Cloud. Let me correct that. Also known as your fashion attorney. Ashley founded the Cloud Law Firm to educate and empower creative business owners with the tools and resources they need to establish and build their empires. A little bit more about Ashley. She is a graduate of Howard University. While attending Howard, she was the co chair of the Fashion Law Week. She was the co founder and president of the Fashion Law Society. She served as the Assistant Attorney General in the Washington, D.C. Office of the Consumer and Protection. Sorry, I messed that up. Of Consumer Protection, and an attorney for the U.S. Small Business Administration before she started her law firm. Ashley has successfully represented fashion and lifestyle brands before the United States Patent and Trademark Office. She's also negotiated numerous partnership deals on behalf of her clients. Ashley has also assisted her clients in navigating the complicated process of receiving funding and support from the federal government. Thank you, Ashley, for joining me today. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited for we know we need to have this conversation.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh my goodness, this is gonna be so great. I just have to say, sometimes when things are going on behind the scenes a little bit crazy, that's just the indicator that you're
Yes,
really supposed to be persevering and continuing.
yes.
Just to hit a little bit, um, there's so many. I had no clue. I'm gonna be your student today, okay?
Okay.
So there's so many facets of fashion law. For everyone, I'm just gonna run through a general list. We will not be able to cover this list. There's no way we can do this in 30 minutes. But we're going to hit on, I'll tell you some of the items that we have on our agenda today, but just so you can know, as a fashionpreneur, I call you fashionpreneurs. These are some of the things you need to have in your repertoire, in your mind. Intellectual property and protection. We're going to talk about that. Counterfeiting, licensing agreements, contracts and force major. Um, Measure, is that right?
Major, major.
Measure. See, I need to learn French. Employment issues from designers to models, antitrust, preferably you won't need bankruptcy, fashion and technology, including data security and privacy, fashion finance, local manufacturing, real estate, retail issues, consumer protection, import and export regulations and tariffs, endangered species law, sumptuary laws, mask and personal protective equipment, and dress code. That's just a quick list.
Mhm.
But what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about fashion law. Ashley is going to, give us an introduction initially to what fashion law is, talking about starting a business. Then we'll talk about IP, intellectual property, and we'll talk about fashion retail, and then we'll wrap up the conversation. I want to share with everyone. I know that there is a bit of a delay. If you have questions, feel free to put them in there, and if as the time permits, I can present them to Ashley or give them to her later. I will say LinkedIn. I do not think that it has changed yet. You can comment. You can send comments to me, but if I put the comment in, I don't think that you'll be able to see it. But just know that I'll get it and I'll respond to you. So with that said, Ashley, let's dive right in.
Yes, let's dive in. One thing that I wanted to say, it's always so interesting to me, and I really appreciate that you shared that list because oftentimes when I tell people that I am a fashion attorney, they immediately go to, oh, so like intellectual property, like as if it's interchangeable. And that is one piece of a very big puzzle because just like any other industry and any other facet of our lives. Fashion is a business. It is a multi-billion dollar, and I think it might even be trillion-dollar business at this point. And so we have to look at it not for the glitz and the glam, which is great because that's the end result, right? But
Right.
there is so much that goes on behind the scenes that is more of the work that I do. That incorporates what fashion law is. So you really touched on the major parts of what fashion law is. Now, my practice is specializing in the intellectual property, but I also handle business development as well as just getting your business started, and also dealing a lot with contracts, because contracts touches everything that you do in business, period. And it's very, very important when it comes to the fashion industry.
Hmm. And since you talked about, that business startup piece, talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that and what people, because I want to say this too. Um, Everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us. Whenever I cultivate a conversation, I like to leave it broad because I have individuals who are budding. I have individuals who are seasoned. So we're going to hit on issues that will cover, as much as we can in this amount of time, based upon where you are in your career. So talk about that starting your business piece and the contract piece.
Yeah, so starting the business, that is where you start, obviously, right? But you would think sometimes that's not exactly how it goes. So well, you know what? Let me say this first. I'm an attorney, yes, but I am providing general information, and none of this should be considered legal advice. And if you want to work with me, we can, but until we have a formal relationship, this we have not created any type of attorney-client relationship. So I have to say that. But just jumping in, I want to provide you with some recommendations that I think would be helpful, regardless of the status of your business. You want to have a solid legal foundation for your business. And what I mean when I say that is, you want to have an entity that is separate from yourself, that is your business, for so many reasons. I'm just going to touch on a few of them.
Mm.
The one that's the most popular is the fact that you want to separate your personal assets and protect them from anything that might happen with your business. You don't want to have a situation where you have a contract with a manufacturer or with a factor, and for some reason you aren't able to pay the bills. And so now, because you don't have that legal protection with having an entity separate from yourself, they're coming after your house. They're coming after your car. You don't want them to be you don't want them to cause you to go into bankruptcy, right? So what you want to do is create that separate entity for yourself, for your business. Another reason why, and this is something that just came up this week, I have a client that hired me kind of in a hurry because she is interested in participating in a mentorship program that also has a grant attached to it. And a lot of times, what people don't realize, whenever you see these types of grant programs, they want to know that you have a separate legal entity, and they make that a requirement in order to qualify, because they want to make sure, one, that you're taking your business seriously.
Mhm.
And one indicator is that you have an actual business and not just you yourself operating as a business, which is not the same thing, right? Another thing is you have access to different tax breaks and different just a lot of different financing that you might not have access to when you don't have a separate entity. And so the list goes on and on. It provides legitimacy to your business. It shows whoever you're working with, whoever you might be contracting with, whoever you might be negotiating a deal with, that you're serious about what you're doing and that you want to be taken seriously, and so that you will be taken seriously.
I'm glad that you said that. The statement you said, it shows legitimacy that you're serious about your business, and that is major. I
Yeah.
won't even go into that conversation.
Yeah. And so,
Let's go
so
ahead.
no, one thing I was going to say is just thinking about different types of legal entities. There are quite a few, and the one that I think most people focus on is the limited liability company, which is it's a pretty good place to start because it's easy to get it up and running, and also it's a lot less maintenance than, say, a corporation, for example. And so I usually recommend at least starting with an LLC if you want to change to something later on as your business grows and becomes this huge empire. And you might want to take on more outside investors or so on and so forth, then you might consider another option. But I usually start with an LLC.
That's good. And it's good to know because I know some people don't understand that you can change the structure later. So thank you for saying that. Um, Thank you, Sean. Intellectual property. I know that's. Let's go ahead and dive in. Let's talk about IP. Um, I know I had someone recently that were trying. Well, a couple of situations. I won't bring them all up, but they, the fashion industry is notorious for having situations where design ideas are lifted. I'll say. Are
Mhm.
there any steps that a creator can take, a creative can take, a designer? Well, not necessarily. It doesn't even have to be a designer, but even a product developer, maybe hair brand or something like that, that
Mhm.
they can take to protect their creation.
I hate to say this because it's like the most lawyer answer, but it depends. It
Right.
really depends. And I'll tell you why. So, one thing that you won't find in the US, I'll say, is the ability to just outright protect fashion designs. Like, say you create this really cool skirt and you want to protect that design. For the most part, there are no protections for that. Now, one thing that some fashion brands are doing is they're starting to use design patents as a way to protect their design. A couple of reasons why this is helpful is because it provides some exclusivity to that design and allows you to be the only one that can provide that design. There are a lot of parameters and a lot of requirements to be able to do that. I'm not going to go into all of them because I am not a patent attorney. There are only a certain amount of patent attorneys, and they have a science background, and it's super sciencey, and that is not my jam at all. So, but I just want to make sure that you're aware that design patents is something that can be available to you in some instances when it comes to your fashion designs.
Okay.
Other aspects of your business or your creativity that you can use to be protected are copyrights. So one way that you can protect something like, say, a print or something that I would consider more like artwork, so like think of like a painting or something along those lines. A copyright can protect certain things like that. So maybe you can't protect the skirt itself, but if you have an original print that you create, that can be protected with a copyright. And the way that you do that is you would register your copyright with the US Copyright Office. And the US Copyright Office is pretty responsive, and it's pretty reasonable in price. So that's something that's also an option for you. And I just want to make clear, with copyrights, you're protecting content, you're protecting creative works. So like I said, think of artwork, think of something that you create like a sculpture or something
Mhm.
of those lines.
Mhm.
Now when we're talking about something that is extremely valuable in fashion, it's trademarks. And the reason why I say that trademarks are so valuable and vital is because most of the time with fashion, it's the brand that carries you. And trademarks is what protects the brand itself. So for example, and this is an example I can give. I don't know if you can see behind me, but I'm trying to reverse it. I can't. But behind me, I can't figure out how to do it because I'm like in reverse. But behind me, I have a Telfar bag, right?
Okay.
And if I just had this bag, okay, there we go. Now I figured it out.
Ah, you can see it, the
You can
pink.
kind of see it, right? It's so beautiful. Now, just imagine if that bag was just pink and it didn't say anything on it. Take that bag next to a bag that has the Telfar emblem on it, and the value automatically goes up, right? And that is protected with trademarks. That's how you protect your brand with trademarks. A trademark is a source identifier. When you see it, when you hear it, you think of a particular brand. You associate that slogan with a particular brand. So when you see the Telfar emblem, you think of Telfar. You think of the shopping bag, the iconic shopping bag that being in Brooklyn, I see everyone walking around with the shopping bag, right? So that's what you're gonna think of. It could also be a slogan, like I said. So think of I'm loving it. You automatically think of McDonald's, right? And McDonald's has a trademark to I'm loving it because they know that they want you to think of them whenever you hear that slogan, right? You can also, in some limited instances, trademark sounds. You can also trademark colors. So
Oh,
one,
wow.
yeah. So one thing that happened when I was first in law school, and this is when I first was like fashion law. Yes, that's it for me. Was I learned about the Christian Louboutin case where they were fighting with Yves Saint Laurent because Yves Saint Laurent has started having red soles on their shoes, and Christian Louboutin already had their trademark for the red soles, and they were and Yves Saint Laurent was trying to argue with them that you can't have exclusivity on red soles. Well, Christian Louboutin won, and so now they're the only ones that can have red soles in the U.S. Right? Except the one caveat was that you can't stop someone from having a completely red shoe with the red sole. That's the only caveat, right? So if it's a brown shoe with the red sole, it's only Christian Louboutin can do that. Now I've seen some people come pretty close. I've seen some pink soles. There's no, it's not red, so it's fine. But there are different ways to protect your brand, and one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is a way to protect your brand also is with contracts. You can have a trademark registration for your brand, and you can give away those rights in a contract if you're not careful. Just give it away.
Ooh.
Yeah. So this is something.
Wait.
Yeah.
Whoa, that is huge. So
Yeah.
if you don't have I just have to restate this. My ghetto language, my bougie ghetto. If you don't have your language right in your contract, somebody will get your rights to your.
Yeah. Yep. And I think you were going to talk about contracts, so let's talk about it now, right?
Yeah.
This is huge. I think my number one advice when it comes to contracts, read them. Read them.
Look, I have to put this up. Sean just literally said, "Read the details and learn the lingo meaning."
Yes, thank you, Sean.
She has a huge story. I'll tell you about that later. But go ahead.
Yes. Read the contract. Read it. And this is my thing. I think sometimes people get so excited when they get to work with a certain brand, when they get a certain opportunity. They're just, whatever you say, I'll just tell me where to sign. And a lot of times these brands are counting on that. They're counting on you to not read because you're just so excited to work with them and you don't know what you're handing over to them. So especially when you're dealing with a big brand, take time to read the contract. Take time to read it and actually understand what it says. Because I'll tell you this, and this is something that is just common business practice. If someone is handing you a contract, it's written in their favor. So what you have to do is read the contract and figure out where you might want to change some things and make sure that your interests are also protected. And the thing is, and I can speak to one of my influencer clients, right? So he got a management contract to work with a management company. And they send the contract over and it is extremely impressive. It's everything is just all for them, right? He's doing all the work, but everything is written for them to reap the benefits of his work. And as he provided the contract to me, I reviewed it, I marked it up, it was all red, right? And so it was time for me to negotiate with them after having sent it over and we had our talk. I'm like ready. I'm like, okay, yeah, I got every kind of argument for the reasons why my client needs all these things. When I tell you they did not even flinch, they were like, okay, looks fine to me. And sometimes it's that simple. Yeah. But a lot of times people don't do that because they don't even think that they can. They don't know if they have the leverage to do that. And one thing that I tell anyone that's like, well, I don't know if I should argue with them or negotiate with them, I should say, because I don't know if I have the leverage or I don't want to ruin the relationship. And what I tell them is, you have the leverage because you're at the table. They obviously
Ooh.
need you for a reason. If you didn't have any leverage, they wouldn't even be talking to you,
Mm.
right? And also, if you advocating for yourself and trying to work to protect yourself ruins the relationship, is that someone that you want to work with in the first place?
Girl, you are speaking truth.
So those are some things that I really try to instill in my clients to empower them, to let them know that they're bringing value to the table and to know that they can advocate on their behalf, or I can do it for them if they want me to, right? So that's just something that I always tell people. Read the contract, make sure you understand it. And what you can even do, even if you aren't able to hire an attorney, is sit down with whoever's on the other table and say, I'm not sure what this means. Can you explain it to me so I can understand it? Can we change the language so that it's more clear? A
Mm.
lot of times they can accommodate you, but I
Mm.
think sometimes we don't think that they can, and they can actually, right? And so back to what we were talking about, you can protect yourself with contracts. You can protect your intellectual property with contracts, right?
Mhm.
For example, let me give you another example.
Mhm.
Now, this was something that was told to me. A designer provided a celebrity with an original design, hadn't been released, no one had seen it before, right? They
Okay.
just gave it to her. They asked her to wear it, and she ghosted them, right? She ghosted the designer.
Oh,
But then she partners with a fast fashion company,
oh gosh.
and they copied the designs and launched a campaign based on it. Now, one thing that the designer could have done is, with that design, provide a non-disclosure agreement, right? Or maybe before sending it over, like, hey, I have a design that I want to send to you. It's original, it's amazing, you're gonna love it, but I need you to sign this non-disclosure agreement first. Basically saying, this is my idea. I'm sharing it with you for a certain purpose, but regardless, I don't want you going around telling everybody about this. I don't want you sharing this with everybody, right?
Mhm.
So that's one way that you can protect yourself with contracts.
This is so good. Um, this is why I enjoy these conversations. I don't like to call them interviews. I like to call them conversations because we want to have a real conversation that reaches and empowers people. So I want to thank you for being that person that wants to empower our people because this is not about us. And there's so much that I will say this. Going back to the beginning where we are talking about the structure. When I started this nonprofit, the legal counsel that I needed because I was so, I'm like, I'm that dot the I cross the T person because of my strong organizational and planning skills.
Mhm.
I will tell you, good God bless me with pro bono assistance to start it. Good legal counsel will help you sleep well at night. As I say that, and we're going to continue with this conversation because this is where my heart is, and I see one of my board members on, Dale. She knows. One of the plans, and I think I briefly mentioned it to you, Ashley. One of the plans, one of the goals, the objectives for Black Fashion World (BFW) is to create a program of fashion attorneys that is beneficial to everyone, so that people who are starting out or wherever you are in your business, if you're in trouble, there be different tiers, so you can come to BFW Foundation and get that legal counsel that you need. People have to work, so I have to be able to get it structured so that it is beneficial to the attorneys, and yet you can be served to based upon where you are financially. So I'm saying that any attorneys that hear this message, please reach out to me so we can work on this structure, because I know that people are in different situations, and the information that Ashley is sharing, that she's pouring out, you need to know this. And oftentimes, as you've already said, people, they don't know. So
Yeah.
they don't go forward.
Yeah, that's a lot of it, and I realize that, right? And so, like in my practice, I always start with anyone that wants to work with me. I always start with like a 20-minute quick complimentary consultation,
Mhm.
because I know that a lot of times people are like, some people know, they're like, okay, I know what I need. I need this, this, and this. Okay, and then some people are like, I don't know. I'm just coming to you because I figured there's some legal stuff that I need to have. And so I can kind of provide a framework and say, these are some things you need to consider, prioritize certain things over others, especially if you have like pending deals going or whatever the case may be. But a lot of times you don't know what you don't know. And that's where you can have a little sticky situation. And one thing that I've learned too is, even in my practice and even in me starting my own law firm, is I'm not an expert in everything, right? I am an expert in certain things, but I'm not an expert in technology. Okay. I am not an expert in accounting, right? So sometimes to take time away from what I am an expert in to do these other things, it's really draining, right? And a lot of times you want to be able to come to your business and your best self, not as your drained self, not as your overstretched self, right? And so I think it is important when you have the ability to outsource what you can. And also make sure that you trust who you're outsourcing to, whether you're hiring an attorney or an accountant or anyone, right? You want to make sure you trust whoever you're working with, and they can take over from you where you may lack.
Mm, this is so good. With that said, we this we needed that. Um, can we hit on NFTs real quick? What are some things that yes, this is new, but what are some
Yeah.
things people need to quick tips that people need to think about with NFTs?
So the one thing that I will say with NFTs is to be cautious, because this is very, very, very new. It's all very new, and especially with in the fashion space, right? And one thing to be aware of is the fact that it's really easy in that space for others to infringe on your intellectual property rights, because I think what might get lost on some people, and from what I've read and what I've seen so far, is it does get lost on people. Just because you might own an NFT to something does not mean that you own the intellectual property, the underlying intellectual property for that NFT. You have a small little piece, right? And so one thing that we talk about in intellectual property is, and really it goes back to like property rights, like just property, is a bundle of rights. You might have a right to use, you might have a right to sell, you might have a right to display. So there's different rights that you could have. But for NFTs, you only have certain types of rights. And I think sometimes that gets lost on people and what kind of rights they have. So you have to read what is called the smart contracts that are used to transfer NFTs from one person to another, or one entity to another, depending on what it is. And make sure you really understand what your rights are and what they aren't.
The metaverse. Oh my lord, this is where we're going.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, let's go into because we talk about e-commerce, and we'll say that for a second. But well, no, let's start there because we're talking about fashion retail now. We're transitioning to that. So since we're talking NFTs, what are some key things that people need to know about e-commerce transaction and protecting themselves, the consumers that
One
they're
of the
selling to? I guess I should say.
one of the biggest things with e-commerce and even just regular retail is data privacy. That is a huge thing right now. Data privacy is huge. So, one thing that I always start off with when I'm talking to new clients is, if you have a website, make sure that you have terms of use and that you have a privacy policy disclosed on your website. I've seen a lot of websites that don't have that, and that is something that is legally required,
Mm.
because what people don't realize is the terms of use and the privacy policy, those are contracts. When someone uses your website, they agree to those. That's why you might see on someone's page it says, it might have like a pop-up like, do you agree to the terms? Yes, it's a contract. To use their website, you have to agree to their terms. Otherwise, you got to get off their website, right? So a lot of times, those are some things that I think are foundational that need to be present on any e-commerce website, right? And then also just data flow and just when you get into like your supply chain, I think that's important, regardless of whether you're e-commerce or whether you are in on the retail side. Those are things that are really important that have to be considered.
Oh, ouch. Oh my gosh. Oof, yeah. That just made my mind is just running. Oh, now I'm gonna check my website. I know I have the privacy there, but let me double check the terms.
Yes.
Talking retail law and brick and mortar. Well, this goes either way, I guess. Advertising. What are things that people need to stay abreast about? A couple for advertising for selling apparel online or in the store.
Yeah, so one thing that I actually saw when I was at the Attorney General's office for DC was a lot of issues with advertising and marketing. One thing that comes up with, like, say, I don't want to name any brand names, but a company that has like a subscription service. You have to make sure that you allow people to cancel and that it's clearly stated how you cancel and you don't make it too difficult for people to cancel, right? So just if you're offering any kind of promotion, you're clear and there's always a way to get out of it, right? Another thing that's really big is email marketing. You have to first of all, you have to get permission to email someone, right? And then you also have to allow someone to opt out of that at any time. I've gotten emails, different marketing emails, where there's nowhere on the email to unsubscribe. That is a requirement by law. You have to allow people to be able to do that, right? So those are just a few things. With sales, you have to make sure that it's truthful and honest. You can't say that something cost $70 and now it's marked down to $60 if it was never on sale if it was never at retail for $70. So there's a lot of different things. I mean, what it really boils down to with advertising is to be honest. Be honest. Be transparent. That's just a good policy to have, period. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I would say.
That sums that up. Are there items that, well, talking about that, with protecting the consumer when they're purchasing from you, then protecting yourself as a fashionpreneur and buying from wholesalers? What are some things that people need to watch for?
So I think with protecting consumers, a lot of it would also be one thing that I just thought about is a return policy,
Huh.
right? You should have that clearly stated on your website as well. Any policies that you have, any kinds of practices that when you're dealing with your clients or customers that are just kind of straightforward, you disclose everything to them up front. Because what you don't want to have is a situation where your client or your customer went into the situation thinking, oh, if I buy this, I can return it, and then they find out later that they can't, because that could be considered false and misleading business practices and marketing practices, and you don't want to deal with that. That's not something that you want to deal with, right? On the dealing with manufacturers, contracts, read them, negotiate them, all of them. I mean, unless you and trust them,
Mm.
right? I would not recommend anyone work with anyone, right? Whether it's a manufacturer, a contractor, and if they were hiring someone, get a recommendation. Make sure that they are legit and make sure that they can handle the work that you're asking them to handle. Like, for example, if you're working with a manufacturer, do like a lot of times manufacturers want to make sure you have the funds to pay them. Do they have the resources to get the job done? Right? So just doing your due diligence when you're working with different partners throughout the supply chain, whether it's sourcing fabrics or whether you're talking about the consumers, making sure that you do your due diligence and you do your background checks and you confirm that you're working with the partners that you should be working with and that you genuinely like them and trust them.
That's good. That's important. I think as I've heard someone say the slang, the slogan, because you keep referring to that contract law. If you aren't doing business if you aren't doing business on paper, meaning
Yeah,
having the right contract.
yeah, that's so true.
Mm.
That's so true because unfortunately, I've had some instances where I have individuals that have come to me and they're in a bad situation, and a lot of times there's some kind of conflict, some kind of disagreement, and now they're like, well, you know, we said that we were going to do this, but now they're doing this, and we didn't agree to that. And I'm like, well, where's the proof? Do you have a contract? Because I think unfortunately a lot of times people come to lawyers when they're in trouble, when there's a problem, right?
The
But
starting point.
yeah, but yeah, a lot of times if you don't have a contract and you're having a disagreement, then it's really hard for you, for the attorney, to be able to prove that if you don't have a contract. And I see this a lot where people are really reluctant to have a contract with, say, like a friend or a colleague or even family because they're like, oh, well, I don't want them to feel like I don't trust them or whatever the case may be. My response to that is just you want to just be on the same page. Look at it that way. This is just a way for us to make sure that we are agreeing to the same things, making sure that we have a mutual understanding, because that's really what a contract is.
Hmm.
It's agreeing to the same thing, right? So that's usually what I tell people when they get stuck on. I don't want to have a contract with them because I don't want to. Again, I don't want to ruin the relationship. I don't want them to think that I don't trust them. You're doing the contract because you do trust them, and you just want to solidify that trust.
Mm. Like a marriage.
I mean, hey, don't you have to sign papers for that? As far as I know, you do, right? So if you
Ooh, that's a can of worms I can open up, but I won't. So, oh my goodness. So let's see if anyone has questions. I know there's a slight delay, and we're coming to that closing time. Go ahead and throw them in the chat so I can share them with Ashley. I'll be sharing her contact details. Um, Talking about brick and mortar stores and um, leases as well as employment. Can you share a couple of tips with us in those areas for the retail piece?
Yeah, so with leases, I know I said this already, but read it. Read it. I know people hate reading leases. I hate reading leases for myself. Like anytime I've gotten an apartment, I've always hated reading the lease because it just seems so um they're usually very long,
Yeah.
right? But in a retail, whenever you're dealing with any type of commercial lease, there is some very
Yeah.
important language in there, and there's usually a lot of requirements for you as the lessee, and there usually are some requirements for the lessor, whoever you're leasing from, and you want to make sure that you understand those requirements. And also, if there is some wiggle room, you take it and negotiate the lease. You don't want to sign something and then you find out later, well, oh, I was only late 2 days. I thought I had 5 days to pay the rent. No, that's not what it says, right? So you want to make sure that you understand what's in that lease and take the time to read it.
This is good.
And then on the part of employees and working with employees, right? First, you want to make sure, are you working with an independent contractor or are they a full out employee? And that's something that I would ask anyone, whether they have a retail store or they are working virtually, because there are implications depending on whether you are hiring people as employees or as as independent contractors. You have certain obligations to employees that you don't have to independent contractors. And so that's something that you really want to pay attention to, especially when it comes to liabilities and especially when it comes to taxes.
Oh.
Yeah, everyone hates taxes, but yeah. The necessary evil. But it really changes whether or not you are paying out taxes. It really depends on whether you have employees or independent contractors. Another big thing, especially in the fashion industry, that has come up, especially after the uprising of 2020 in June of 2020, is discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
right? In the fashion industry as a whole, but
Mm-hmm.
especially with retail workers. I mean, it goes every level, whether you're corporate, whether you are a fashion model, or you are a fashion retail associate. That's a huge thing that has come up in the legal space is discrimination and just different types of discriminatory practices that need to be avoided in the industry.
Hmm. Yeah, the DE and I. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I have a question that came through. I'm gonna share it with you. Most successful Black business owners have the story where they hired friends and they got burned. What are your legal suggestions with hiring, and should you hire friends?
Number one thing is if you trust them, go for it, but have contracts in place just in case. You have to protect yourself. If it's something that you are taking seriously, you have to protect it like it's a baby because there's no one else to protect it but you, especially when you're starting out. I would not say not to do it because I've heard of success stories with friends starting businesses or friends working together. It's not impossible, but I think what happens is when the fallout happens, if the fallout happens, then what happens after that? What happens to the business itself? Does it crumble? Can it still stand? Are you able to still stand? And I think when you have those contracts in place, it's more clear. So
Mm.
I would not say just straight out like don't hire your friends, but I think you should definitely have some things in place. And it doesn't and it's not even just a legal thing, it's also an accounting thing. How much access do you want them to have to your day in and day out? Do they have access to your bank account? You know, things like that. So it really gets down to kind of trying to figure that out. And I know it's really hard when you first start out and it's just an idea and it's so wonderful to be able to work with a friend so you can bounce ideas off of each other and kind of just grow and learn together. But it's still good to just have those parameters in place at the beginning so that if you part ways, everything doesn't crumble.
Mm, that's good. This question, not sure, but it says California passed a law about SB 62 that says if an employee sues the business, the brand they work with is equally liable for the lawsuit. What issues have you experienced with California designers? Do you do anything with the California law?
Um, I'm just starting to. I'm
Okay.
not barred in California. I'm barred in New York, Texas, and in Washington D.C. But I think it's a little unclear. I would have to do a little research to figure out exactly what that lawsuit is about.
That's wow. That's a lot. Okay. This is Ashley, this has been so good. Let's see if anybody else has another question, throw it in the chat. But in the meantime, are there any general resources or quick tips that you want to share with anybody about making sure they're compliant with fashion law, protecting themselves, their employees, people they serve?
So a few things that I would say. One, just getting started. Check out your local small business development centers. So what I would tell you to do is to go to the Small Business Administration's website, sba.gov, which is where I just left actually, and check out their free resources. There's also something called SCORE. There's an
Mm.
organization called SCORE, SCORE.org. They provide free mentoring for business owners, depending on your industry, and they have experts that can kind of guide you through the process. Those are just some general resources that you can use. The Then there's a couple other things that I would suggest. Like I said, the small business development centers. If you go on the SBA.gov website, they have where it says local assistance, and you can actually work with someone one on one, and they can provide you with different resources that are free to you, and also direct you to different funding opportunities and things of that nature as well. I would also say to get plugged in with um, any type of fashion newsletters, just so you can see what's going on. One that I just recently joined was it's called the Fashion Network, and they send out a lot of newsletters. I think like once a day, and they're really spot on about what's going on, and it's free, which I like because there are a lot of different. Um, there are quite a few different fashion publications that you have to pay for, like WWD and the Business of Fashion, which are great, but those subscriptions can be astronomical, honestly. So just staying in the know. And you can also follow me. I'm launching Your Fashion Attorney. I'm going to have a website, and I'm also on Instagram, and I'll be sharing some tips as they come up, and also as I think of them when I'm talking to clients and they inspire me to share some information, I will. And I have a lot of information to share. And one thing that I always do is I love to empower people, period, whether they're my client or just anyone. And so I always like to pour into others because I think oftentimes, especially for Black people, um, we need to be poured into more. And so I thank you, Carla, for what you're doing to pour into everyone that is joining this call and for others. And and just as a whole, because this is the work that we have to do for each other.
Exactly. And Ashley, I thank you um, for just wanting to educate people. That is so important. And in this space, definitely fashion. We need someone that cares for us, that we can identify with as well, all of those facets. I have one additional question. What can small fashion designers do to stop big businesses like Fashion Nova from stealing their designs?
So this is a tough one, right? We talked about this earlier about the fact that generally you can't necessarily protect your designs. Now, there's a couple things that you can do. Um, One is more cost effective than the other. One thing is you can send them a cease and desist letter, letting them know that they are infringing on your rights by copying your designs. That can cost some money, obviously, and it takes a little bit of time to get someone to draft up a letter and send it over to them and make sure that they receive it. The other thing that I always advise, regardless of however much money you have, is to use your platforms, use your community to support you in combating that type of infringement and that type of appropriation, right? So, one thing that I've seen that has been very effective for fashion designers, and in particular Black fashion designers, is to launch campaigns basically calling them out. Call them out. Call out Fashion Nova or whoever else is copying your brand, and let the world decide. Because one thing that I'll tell you is people say, as a lawyer, this might sound crazy, but people always say, call a lawyer, sue them. But do you know how long it takes for a lawsuit to go through? It can take years. Do you know how much money that can cost? Hundreds of thousands, right? But sitting down at your computer or grabbing your cell phone and making a side by side of your design and the other company's design and writing out a very thoughtful caption or two, priceless. And it doesn't cost you nearly as much, and it's quick. And I will say that in some instances, the court of public opinion works a lot faster than the regular court. The regular court system can, right? And sometimes you just want them to stop, right? Stop what they're doing. obviously it would be great to be able to also get some kind of funds from them for that. But if your focus is to just get them to stop, I always advise designers to launch some kind of media campaign and send it out to everyone you know, and hopefully it goes viral. And basically, you're shaming them into doing the right thing, because a lot of times the fast fashion companies don't. And a lot of times they're on to the next thing by the time a lawsuit would have been launched, or so on and so forth, because that's the name of their game. That's their motto. It's to constantly churn out new fabrics, and new designs, and just constantly look for inspiration. And they often do this by looking towards Black designers, because at the end of the day, we are highly, highly influential. And I can't remember where I read it, but they said that Black women are the most influential group in the world. And so we are the culture, we create the culture, we inspire the culture. And it's due time that we start to reap the benefits of that.
Mm. I don't think I need to say anything further with this conversation. We're going to end it right there. Ashley, this has been incredible. I have a comment that came through, I'll share with you. This has been so enlightening. So, Ashley, let's close it out. I want to thank everybody for joining. But, Ashley, I want to just, I wish I could just give you a hug. This is this virtual life we have.
So
Um, but just taking time out of your schedule, y'all. She is really, really, look, this woman, this is why she's called. I want you to remember, she is our fashion attorney, your fashion attorney. Um,
yes.
oh my goodness, look at these comments coming in.
Oh, thank you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you all just taking the time to invest in yourself, because that's what you're doing with being here. Is you're investing in yourself and you're taking this seriously, and I'm proud of every single one of you.
So, with that said, everyone, this replay will be available on the YouTube page as well as all of the pages, but you can easily access it later today by going through the event gallery on the blackfashionworld.org page to replay it. I know I'm going to have to replay it to just take some of the information in, but I think my takeaway for the moment, the one that just sticks out with me, was where you talked about how you do have, oh my goodness, and someone put it in the chat, but basically you're at the table. So you do have that right, that influence.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and everybody else. Have a good day.
Thank you.